Welcome to Power Lunch West Africa. We're live to you from the 24th edition of the World Economic Forum on Africa. The theme for this year's event is Forging Inclusive Growth, Creating Jobs. Well, we're having a panel discussion right now looking at women economic empowerment. I have with me Olajumoke Adekeye. She's a founder, Young Business Agency in Nigeria. She's also a global shaper. I also have Githuku-Shongwe, founder and CEO of Afroes Transformational Games, Kenya. And lastly, I have Ndidi Nwuneli. She's the founder of Leap Africa and co-founder of Ace Foods. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join me. Now, the World Economic Forum in Africa has brought so much attention to not only to Africa but to this region, West Africa. Nigeria is hosting it for the first time. But there's also been focus on our security issues. Of course, bringing to mind the abduction of 200 plus girls. Now, let me start with you, Jumoke. What does that say about women's right to education and safety?
Thank you for that question. It's very important to us as global shapers, an organization that I represent. It's an initiative of the World Economic Forum that young people have a voice in shaping their future. In light of the recent crisis in terms of thinking about these young children, these young girls who are abducted, I think it goes to show the need for amplifying the youth voice. There's been a massive social media response to that, the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls. But more than that, I think we're moving from just amplifying our voice, just raising our voices, to saying we want to see specific things, right? And so even as young people, young women who are among the global shapers, we've been thinking about what we call factivism, right? We recognize it's no longer enough to just complain about something that isn't working or recognize something that has not been given recognition. For instance, young women entrepreneurs in Nigeria or anywhere else in Africa, actually, and to say we need to have a seat at the table and say specific things. We need to identify the policies that we want to see. We need to identify the changes that we'd like to see made. And so moving from just having a voice, having a seat, but preferring bold solutions.
And let me come to you. What does this say? Because Nigeria we've been recording strides in terms of empowering women, especially in the areas of education. Now, with what's going on with these abducted girls, your perspective on what that does to our image?
Well, I think that the image of Nigeria and the rest of Africa really is at stake right now, because the security situation is not it's not easy to resolve because of the type of security that we're dealing with. But I think in this particular case, the fact that it's targeting young girls is going to really influence negatively inclusive growth, because growth requires that there's distribution between girls and boys, between males and females. And so we're very concerned about the situation, but I think now that we know that there is going to be, this is becoming a trend, that we need to put in place very quickly prevention methods, because so much of it is about the reaction. We need to bring back the girls as quickly as possible. We're concerned that the move was too slow, and that as a result we seem to have lost time and the ability to react fast enough to bring back the girls. But we're still praying and hoping that this can be resolved really quickly. But the big issue is, how do we prevent that from happening to more? How do we find innovative ways to make sure that even with a security context like that, young girls can still be educated? And so as the new champions, we sat together yesterday and we had a workshop where we started exploring, on Wednesday, exploring what are the sort of tools that can be used to actually create some prevention of this recurring again, but also being able to actually educate girls where they are. And so there are initiatives and some ideas that are going around this forum, how to use mobile technology, how to use different digital methodologies, or just some of the basic ways in which Africans
hold that thought for us. We'll come to specifics on how we can prevent this from happening again, and of course how other areas in which women can be empowered. Indeed, let's get your thoughts on the situation.
Well, as a Nigerian, clearly it's a very sad and dire situation, but it reminds us of the root causes of some of these issues, which is unemployment. and lack of education and access to education. And for the last 12 years, I've devoted my life to promoting youth leadership and youth employment. And I think that we need equitable engagement in education and employment from both men and women alike. Unfortunately, the northern part of Nigeria has to a large extent been neglected, and youth in that region cry out for jobs and for access. And if a young person is engaged mentally, physically, and spiritually with something to do, they will not engage in negative activities. And so I think this has heightened my commitment and Leap Africa's commitment to trying to address the challenges that young people face with access. Now, women play a special role in this country and in our country's history. And we cannot stand back and allow our women to continue to be attacked. And so as young global leaders and as individuals in this nation, we have been coming out to say we want to see changes. We want to prioritize the role of women. We want to invest in our women. We want to ensure that they have safe access to education and equitable access to education. Okay. There are a number of initiatives, and I'm sure we can talk about that as we go forward.
Jumoke, now let's get down to specifics. When we talk about economic empowerment of women, what does it mean to you, especially as a global shaper?
That's a great question. I think it means a number of things. Economic inclusion, women. I mean, I think we need to even think about perhaps some of the root causes of gender inequality that we see. There are many sides to the narrative, right? Some of which are deep-rooted cultural issues. We also have things such as the absence of regulation or even discriminatory policies that prevent women from having access to land. And so in terms of opportunities, in terms of employment, we see the glass ceiling in terms of access to land to even have owning their own land. And so economic inclusion to me means, and economic empowerment really is for women to have access to these opportunities, not just not just simply finance, because finance is absolutely critical, but also having access to land and being able to own land. I think South Africa passed recently a landmark sort of regulation allowing women to have rights to land, to be landowners, and I think we need to see such bold moves in policy making across the continent, in expanding throughout the continent.
I mean, taking from what Jumoke just said, have we been unable to get our policymakers to listen? Because when we want to change the situation of women, empowering them economically, in education, ensuring that their rights are respected when it comes to health, like especially sexual and reproductive health, are we not getting them to listen?
Well, I think they are listening, but I think the issue is, what are the models that we can actually put on the table that are actually scalable? And how does the policy match the practice? Because I think what we've become very good at as African countries, with a lot of support from the rest of the world, is to put great policies on the table. The translation of those policies and the implementation of those policies is what makes a difference. And I think that there's some exciting initiatives that are happening now where women within institutions, within government itself, are saying we've got to actually work on the kind of quotas that we require, because this is what has shown where transformation has happened. Look at the situation in Rwanda. I mean, Rwanda decided we're not going to play footsie with this business of inclusion of women in political positions, and they moved from what everybody else thought was big at 30% to over 60% participation at the highest level of politics in Rwanda. And as a result, they have gone and translated that in terms of all the different policies they're making. In terms of financial inclusion, we are seeing in Kenya huge amounts of women beginning to penetrate financial opportunity, but it's not because the policy is not there. It's been there, but it's because there are innovations that are taking place in the mobile technology business. Mobile banking is opening up the spaces. Banks are beginning to go where women are, and as a result, we have women who ordinarily would be earning $1 a day who have moved their level of economic participation to $2,000 a day. because they're able to actually engage and they're included. So a lot of it has to do really with being innovative in how we reach women, thinking about models that are scalable, thinking about how to really be able to implement and execute what policymakers are saying.
Ndidi, picking from that, models that are scalable, innovation, where should we start? I mean, there's so many things that we can put on the table, but for you, from your own perspective, where can we start?
Well, I think that the foundation of it is education, as we've said, creating a level playing field for young women. And education is scalable, especially with the use of technology. Now, beyond that, I think entrepreneurship is a fantastic route for women to be included in economic development and growth. And what you see in countries like Nigeria is that women have micro businesses. We have 17 million SMEs in this country, but most of them are micro businesses, mom and pop shops, corner stores, maybe hairdressing salons. And what we need to do to scale is to empower those women through training programs, and there are lots of civil society organizations involved in training, mentoring programs, access to finance, like she's spoken about, and beyond that, access to markets. I've spent a lot of time in agriculture, and the burden of agriculture in Africa, we know, is women. Women are the basic producers, but you see them at the producer level. Now, we need to help women move up the value chain into processors. We often use the term middlemen, and I always say, why? Why can't we have middle women? Because the margins in the agricultural value chains are taken by the transporters, by the processors, by the middle people. And so for agriculture, I think if we invest in women in agriculture and helping them move up that chain, we will reach millions of women across Africa.
I still have with me here Olajumoke Adekeye. She's the founder of Young Business Agency in Nigeria. She's also a global shaper. I also have Githuku-Shongwe, the founder and chief executive officer of Afroes Transnational Games Kenya, and also Ndidi Nwuneli. She's the founder of Leap Africa and co-founder of Ace Foods. Thank you so much for sticking around for us. Now, so many issues for women and girls on the African continent. Now, let's talk about sexual reproductive health. I know, looking at the statistics, especially, Jumoke, this is to you, statistics from the United Nations, Africa still has one of the poorest indicators. For you, what would you like to see policymakers begin to do to address this?
That's a good question. So I've been working in the public health space, and specifically in family planning and access to other methods of reproductive health, protection in a way. What's been interesting, I can speak for the Nigerian narrative, traveling around semi-rural and rural areas in Nigeria, it's been interesting to find that women want these. They want these different contraceptive methods, but it's been interesting to see that because of cultural barriers, in some places women have to get permission from their husbands. Sometimes they actually do it behind their backs. I think, again, it's to understand that to move forward, we need policymakers to put in place policies that actually address rights for women, even in marriages. It's important that we recognize that as the civil society and NGO world, as well as the private sector, have come up with market-shaping strategies in order to change the landscape in places like Nigeria and around Africa, that we really need to see that policy-making effort in addressing some behavioral and cultural issues, and we need to understand.
Sorry about it. I know culture, the issue of culture, that can be very tough to get around. I mean, what kind of, are we making giant strides in that regard? Are there examples we can point to? Right, there are
NGOs working in Nigeria that actually do what's called interpersonal communication, and they decide to use community leaders, understanding that the way that most people in Nigeria are, the social structures are organized around religious leaders and community leaders. And so even though when we think of health, we may not necessarily think of community leaders in terms of who women or women of reproductive age will listen to, they still place a premium on the opinion of these leaders. And so some of these community leaders also happen to be women leaders. And so it's been interesting to see some initial results of success in that area. Whether or not it's scalable is another question, because cultures differ even within Nigeria. So you can imagine when we're talking, from Cape from Cape Town to Cairo. So it's going to be interesting to see. But I think each policymakers, I think we need to start making policies not just at the national level, as you mentioned broad stroke levels, but also looking at state level, also looking at local levels, and tailoring our policies to the cultural differences that we have in different countries in Africa.
And would you like to speak to that point too?
Sure. I think that for me, the issue about sexual and reproductive health is that we need to continuously integrate it with the economic empowerment discussion that we had earlier. What we find a lot is that we've been working on a project on STEM, really trying to get young girls and women to start penetrating the science, technology, math and engineering environment. And what's interesting about that is that the opportunities are huge for women, and there's a huge growth path. We also know that this is where inclusivity grows.
But what are the barriers that hold them back?
But we have sexual and reproductive health issues is one of the big things we've experienced, and this is why I was saying we have to take an integrative approach. We were working with a group of young women in a province in South Africa who are excelling in science and math, but they actually were unable to progress because out of 60 young women that we worked with, 50 of them have experienced some form of sexual abuse. And a lot of it is happening within their homes and their families. And so what we've had to do is come up with an approach where we are complementing the education side, the economic empowerment side, with actual prevention and education around their sexual and reproductive health. So the policies, at least in many of the contexts where we work, the policies exist. Again, it's going back to the issue of practice and implementation. How do you actually begin to work in a manner that is much more integrative, that actually recognizes the context where women work and live, and what are the challenges that they face in that environment? So, I mean, there's all kinds of challenges. With STEM, the challenges are related to just investment in the kind of education that is being delivered, the ability for teachers to be able to actually deliver it, the scalability of the models. But with sexual and reproductive health, there's been a lot of work done in this area by many, many, many organizations and governments as well. But we still see a very, I would say, sort of separate approach to it that doesn't integrate it with their economic empowerment. And so where they make advances with their sexual and reproductive health, if they're not able to actually pull themselves out of poverty, for instance, they're constantly just going back into that vicious cycle of poverty and lack and sexual and reproductive health challenges, and they won't be able to get out of it. So we need to integrate their approach, I think.
Now, Ndidi, what radical change at a policy through legislation would you like to see in that regard?
I would like to see a greater integration of sexuality and reproductive health issues in higher education. I know there's been a lot of backlash. How early do you introduce this issue to children? But because we have the highest rates of enrollment in the primary school level and such high attrition between primary, secondary, and university, we can't wait till university to start teaching about these issues. So I would like to see some integration of this into our primary school curriculum, so people understand their rights and responsibilities for both men and women. When we talk about social studies, civics, we haven't updated that curriculum. And some NGOs like Action Health have been fighting to get this into the primary school education. The concept of what is right and wrong, I think we've missed the boat. Even values education has to be incorporated at an earlier age, and that will allow us to scale. And the last thing I would say is I think we miss an opportunity in our continent when we don't work with faith-based organizations. Both Christian and Islamic organizations have to take this issue on. I say that, a lot of our consumer goods companies get to the most remote villages, but so do our churches and our mosques. And if we can also transform their mindsets we can use them as vehicles to reach the masses.
Okay, Olajumoke, let's go to the issue of politics, governance. I've often heard experts say, if you put a woman at, in governance, things there's usually a turnaround. But then for you, if we have all these issues that still bog women down, how do we cross on into being very effective in politics?
Yes, I think what's important to also think about is what about women's empowerment, or what are the issues, the underlying issues for women, women's progress. We recognize that the unique challenges that face women is acting both as breadwinners and also as caregivers. And in many African cultures, there's the lack of recognition that women actually have these dual roles. And so they're expected to either have a full-time job and come back, take care of the kids. And I mean, there are many women who are very fortunate to have supportive partners in their families, but we need to recognize that even as women progress in their careers, in their work, whatever fields, whether they're very well placed in government or they're smallholder farmers, that there is a support system that's needed to help them fulfill different dual roles. And so I think it's important that we begin to recognize that this is an issue that should be addressed. We spoke earlier about reproductive health issues. We have to think about, so what is it about reproductive health that's important to address? It's that women in rural areas are dying because they don't have choices about when they will have kids, how many kids they would have. And so when we begin to recognize the impact, I think it's helpful to look at the impact that things like lack of reproductive health choices and women in also recognizing the impact that also recognizing the impact that not necessarily the absence of women, but the absence of a recognition of what exactly is the issue can have.
Olajumoke, hold your thoughts for us now. And how can women break through that barrier and become more effective in for us to see better participation in women in politics and governance?
Yeah. It's a bit of a catch-22, I would say, because what politics requires to be effective, and I gave the example of Rwanda, where we are seeing 60% plus participation of women in both politics and government, leadership, and we're finding leaders everywhere in Rwanda. It's incredible. South Africa has a similar example, but South Africa's is a bit lower, but it's been very, very effective. I think until we can actually really push for critical mass in every one of these different structures of politics and government and that kind of, those leadership institutions, it becomes very difficult to actually start inspiring and getting younger women to take interest in this environment, because they look and they see that the one woman who's a token in that, who looks like a token placed in a particular political party or placed in a particular job, is struggling, and she's on her own and she's having to behave differently from everybody else to just survive. And so the ability to actually push for critical mass, and I really believe in quotas. I know it's very controversial, people fight a lot about affirmative action, but I really believe in quotas, because when you push countries, let's put it this way, there is so much to benefit from being a politician from an economic perspective, and we've seen this amongst the men. This is what they do. They're politicians because they make money from it, right? Now, women won't penetrate in there because the men say welcome. Okay. So if we don't set the quotas and actually agitate in large numbers to get a critical mass, we will not see a change in this system. Okay,
and I'm sorry, I need to come in. I need Ndidi, just speak to that point too.
Okay. Well, I think that there's an important role for a pipeline. And I believe in investing in young women, introducing them to the concept of leadership, which we've been doing through Leap Africa, and then exposing them to role models. I think the power of positive role models in politics can transform the individuals. I'll tell you, at Leap Africa, when we started 12 years ago, we used to start with a game, Guess the Leader, and would ask people in the classroom to come up with a list of leaders. We got very few women on our list. Over the years, that has changed, because you have more women who are doing good work, like she said, in politics. So now young women are aspiring to political position. We also need to fund them. When you talk to women who are interested in politics, they tell you, I don't have a war chest. I don't have money. I don't have houses to sell. And so there are actually a few initiatives, a few nonprofits in Nigeria that have created funds for women who are interested in politics to tap into.
Well,
and I would like to see more of that across Africa, and more women supporting each other who, when they do decide to run.
Thank you so much, Ndidi. Very interesting point you made there, putting aside funds for women who are interested in politics. We're going to have to leave it there. I wish we had more time, but that's where we're going to wrap it today. Thank you so much, Olajumoke Adekeye, founder, Young Business Agency in Nigeria and a global shaper, and Githuku-Shongwe, founder and CEO of Afroes Transformational Games Kenya, and of course Ndidi Nwuneli, founder Leap Africa and co-founder of Ace Foods. We've been looking at women economic empowerment. It's still the 24th edition of the World Economic Forum on Africa, holding here in Abuja, Nigeria.